Welcome back to Nowhere Near Done, where we talk about reinvention, identity shifts, resilience, and what it actually looks like to navigate midlife as women. Today, I'm sitting down with Joyce Dudley, former Santa Barbara County District Attorney, longtime public servant, mother, and one of the most inspiring women I know. I'm so lucky to call her a friend. In this conversation, we talk about leadership, ambition, motherhood, aging, personal growth, and what it means to evolve through different seasons of life, especially as women who have spent so much of our lives taking care of everyone else or trying to meet everyone else's expectations. Joyce shares stories from her career, the lessons she's learned about resilience and reinvention, and the perspective that comes from living through both personal and professional challenges over time. What I loved most about this conversation is how honest and reflective it feels. It's really about becoming more comfortable in your own skin, trusting yourself, and realizing that growth doesn't stop at any age. Here's my conversation with Joyce. Hi, Joyce. Thank you so much for joining me.
Always been such a pleasure to be interviewed by you. I'll never forget the first time I met you when you were a young reporter and you knew so much about the issues and you cared so much. So anytime I have an opportunity to be interviewed by Sarah Bush, I'm in.
Well, thank you. And same to you. I remember also that was the day that you were announcing your candidacy. And it's been so great over the years getting to know you and getting to know your story. I have just had so much admiration for you because you have done so many incredible things over your lifetime. And that is why I wanted to talk to you today, because not only have you had an incredible career, but your life has been so inspiring. Um, so I kind of want to go back and get a little bit of history because you did not begin your career in law.
Oh, no, not at all. I've always been extremely interested in children and being a voice for the voiceless with children. I began volunteering with abused children when I was 17 years old and a senior in high school. And I wasn't altruistic in those days. The high school announced that if you wanted to take Fridays off, you could go volunteer at some nonprofit. And I thought, oh man, anything to get out of Fridays in high school. I was ready to go to college, done with high school. And I thought, well, I want to do that. And then they gave me a list of organizations, and one of them was the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. And I had no idea that people could be cruel to children. My parents had been very loving. I grew up in a nonviolent household, so I didn't understand the concept. So I assumed that these were just poor kids, kids who didn't have money, and that was the cruelty to children. When I knocked at the door for the first time, I was shocked by what I saw. It literally took my breath away. I saw children in wheelchairs, on crutches, with burn marks, and the facility was not clean. And I couldn't believe all these children were there. I had come in my mind to teach them how to dance because I was a dance student. I arrived in my leotards and tights, but really, all I could do was sit down on the floor and ask them what happened to you. And they were happy to have someone ask the question. And they sat down, and I kept going Friday after Friday. We never ended up dancing, but I ended up listening carefully to their lives and offering the support and love that a 17-year-old can offer. But after that, I knew I always had to work with kids. And I still haven't stopped doing that, or being a voice for the voiceless, whoever that is, animals, kids, the elderly, because that is my greatest joy.
From there, you went on and you were in education, correct?
Yeah, I went into early childhood education, and ultimately I was the director of Head Start and the state-funded state preschools in Santa Barbara County from Guadalupe to Carpinteria. And as a head of this program, I knew that I had a responsibility to, when I witnessed child abuse, I was a mandatory reporter, and I would report to anything I viewed as child abuse to either Child Protective Services in those days, now Child Welfare Services, or the police. And I'd made a report to child welfare services because I'd seen a father when their toddler wouldn't get out of the car to go to preschool that day, get to the door and kick the child very hard in their lower back. I immediately made the report. And then the next day, he was back again, dropping his child off. I somehow expected he was going to be arrested. There was going to be an investigation, and there wasn't. And so I went to social services, asked who I could talk to about this. It was kind of my Mrs. Smith goes to Washington moment. I found the person who evaluates the cases, and she just showed me a stack full of cases and didn't know where mine was and didn't know when she'd get to it. And I was sick and infuriated that a child could be abused because and continue to be abused because of the red tape of the system. And when I expressed my concern to her, her next response to me was, "You don't like it? Go to law school." So I'm sure she meant it so that I would have more respect for her because she was a lawyer. But instead, I went home that night and told my husband, I'm going to go to law school.
I love that so much. And at that point, you had how many children?
At that point, we had three boys, and we already knew because that was my husband, John. They were his, hers, and our. Those are his and her kids that we brought into the marriage. We knew we were going to have one too. So I knew going into that year, we were going to try to get pregnant, and I was going to begin law school. And it didn't even occur to me you couldn't do both simultaneously. And I still had a job.
That's incredible. And so, how old were your boys at this point?
So Mike was 3, Matt was 4, and Chris was 6.
Just like in the thick of it, and you took that on. And so you started your law career. As women, we just are already handling so much. There's so many things to juggle. And so what do you think it was that gave you that courage to do all of the things and feel like you could?
I couldn't stand the thought of a child being abused. I just couldn't stand it. And I had hoped going into early childhood education that I could make a difference. In the case of the child who was abused and was continuing to abuse, even be abused after the fact, it was just, oh gosh, a compulsion. I desperately wanted to do it. Now, I loved my sons more than anything in the world, and my husband and I talked about it, and he said, "You could definitely do both. Together, we could do both." So it was his encouragement, said, "Hey, law school's at night, 3 nights a week. I'll be home by then, and you go off to law school and follow your dream." And I'll never forget the conversation we had when I had just given birth to our fourth son. I went to school, had the baby the next day, went back to school the following week. I was just, what, 6 days out of pregnancy, and the baby was 10 pounds, and, I was exhausted and breastfeeding. And I brought the baby to school because I couldn't be away. The baby cried at school. I came home, hormones, breast milk, just crazed. And I said, I'm going to drop out of law school. I'm going to take a leave of absence. I need to focus on this baby and our other three sons. And he was great with me. He listened to me. He was compassionate. He was loving. And then he said, I understand completely. One question: what are you going to do 3 nights a week? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, you signed up for law school. I signed up to be with our sons 3 nights a week. And I understand you don't want to go to law school, but how are you going to spend those 3 nights? Because they're mine, those 3 nights. And I was shocked. And I said, and my only answer could be, well, I guess I'll go back to law school. So I mean, I certainly had the passion, but he had the strength to feel that it was something that we could do as a team. And the boys were very proud of it. So I'll never forget, I felt so guilty going to law school 3 nights a week. And one of my sons got very upset on my law school nights. 20 years later, he's living in New Orleans. We're sitting there sharing a bottle of wine on Bourbon Street. And I finally had the courage and I said to him, so, how much did I mess with your head being gone 3 nights a week in law school? And he said, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, "You cried, you got upset, you threw yourself on the door and the windows." He said, "You're thinking of one of my brothers. I never did that." Now, of course, I'm sure he did it. And he said, "The only thing I remember, and I hope your listeners will really embrace this, he seemed so upset at age 5, and his response 20 years later is, 'Mom, the only thing I remember is how proud I was of you and how I took one of your law school books to show and tell and said, my mommy goes to school just like I do.'"
I think as women, we take on so much guilt no matter what, if we're working, if we're not working, we're present, if we are busy working outside the home,
Yes,
whatever it is that we're doing, we
yes.
take on all the guilt for everyone and we take on the responsibility for everyone and everyone's happiness.
Yes. It's so exhausting because whereas men grew up believing it's my job to provide for the family and go off and work. You worked, I worked when our kids were little, and I always
Mhm.
felt, as you said, guilty. I should be home with them. But I'll
Mhm.
tell you, your listeners, another story, which I think is very important. When my first son was in daycare, and I was the director of Children's Home Society, I was bringing him to the doctor one time and he was on the table. And before the doctor walked in, I was just blowing on his belly and playing with him. And the nurse walked in and she said, "Do you mind if I ask you if you're a working mother?" And I said, "No, not in the least. I am." And she said, "The difference between working mothers, when I see it, and mothers who are home with their kids is they just that enjoyment of just having some time alone with them and playing with them. You really suck up all the enjoyment of time with your kids in a way that people take for
Right.
granted who are home with their kids." And I found that kind of inspiring.
It is, it's so much about just being present when you have time.
Yes.
Yeah, and the
Yes.
quality of time that you get to spend with them.
I kept using as my mentor during those days and even now, be here
Yeah.
now. If I'm at work, be here now.
Uh-huh.
If I'm with the kids, be here now. And that so it became an issue of quality versus quantity.
Yeah.
And if I committed to being here now, I felt better about it and then I could do the same. I remember Tom Snedden, he was my boss at the DA's office, and he said being a trial lawyer is like being a fighter pilot. When you're involved in the trial, give it all your attention. And then when the trial ends, spend time with your family.
Mhm.
And that was an easier thing for me to do. Just give both my all.
Yeah. And that's tough though, because a lot of the cases that you handled were probably so, I mean, the circumstances were probably so difficult.
They were.
And so to not take that home with you, that has to be so difficult.
Hmm.
But I wanna get back to, your career and your sort of your path. So
Uh-huh.
law school, graduated law school, became an attorney.
Hmm.
Tell me a little how then you ended up, deciding to run for DA.
First of all, becoming an attorney was the really cool thing after the bar. After I passed, no, after I was waiting for I was going to get my bar results the next day. Ran into Tom Snedden and he said, "Hey, your results come out tomorrow. How do you feel?" I said, "Very anxious." He said, "Well, just give me a call because I know you passed." So I passed. I don't know how he knew that I was going to pass, but he did. And I gave him a call. And that day, he offered me a job at the DA's office. So the day I passed the bar, I was offered a job at the DA's office, and few people get to have that experience. But Tom was one of my teachers in law school, and it was a trial prep class. So I had done work that he had seen then. So, so exciting. And then for 20 years, I was a trial lawyer, and I never thought I could have a better career. I got, as you pointed out, I ended up getting more and more serious cases, more cases involving vulnerable victims, making a difference so I could bring them justice. And I thought, it doesn't get better than this. And then my office started going through some changes, and leadership was a little wobbly. And I loved the office so much, loved the county so much that I never expected to want to do it. But I thought, I could do this. 20 years of being a trial lawyer, I could do this. I could run the office. It was a very difficult decision. I had to run against the then district attorney. It was hard. It was grueling. As you well know, it was an 18-month campaign. But I was driven by the fact that the county deserved somebody who was going to give it their all. And based upon my life experiences, being a mom, being in the community, being an educator, I felt that I could bring my best self to running the office. And I was so thrilled when I won.
Yeah, that was really exciting. And then, do you think because you were a mother at this point, you'd already, I mean, and you took that with you through your journey of, going to law school and everything, do you think that that shaped the way that you approached your work? Do you think that it helped you in any way or?
No question.
Mhm,
Being a mom affected, I was a law school professor at the
mm,
time. I was a trial lawyer, ultimately the elected district attorney.
mhm,
Most of my decisions where people went, wow, how did you get there?
mhm,
I got there by being a mom
mm,
because some of the built-in things, we love our children with all our
mm,
heart. We want the best for them, and by the best, it's not it's we want to be able to empower them. We want to be able to make sure they're compassionate, that they're giving back to their community, that they're good people, that they're going to be good parents, good significant others or spouses. And that's the kind of thing you want to deal in some ways, and this may sound abstract, with a justice system. You want a system to be just. And I think that those applications, and then of course at meetings, it always helped that I was always dealing with four big personalities at the dinner table. And I was trying to make sure each of them felt heard and respected, but by the same time, make sure each of them got to speak. So a lot
yeah.
of the meetings I was at was just like dinner with four boys.
Nice. That can be kind of a male dominated profession. So, what was that like? Did you ever run into instances where that made a difference?
I did. It was really hard. When I first got the job, I was told the only reason I got the job from other people, not from anybody in the office, but the only reason I got the job was because they had to bring in more women. And that was so hurtful because I'll never forget it. I'll never forget the moment I was told that, how deeply it hurt, because I knew how hard I worked to get through law school and to interview at the DA's office. And to hear that it was based on none of my efforts was insulting. And I could try to talk my head out of it, but it didn't work as well. And then I remember a moment in court when I turned to a defense attorney on a case, and he was busy chatting. It was still kind of a break in court, and I told him that I wanted to talk to the judge about scheduling. And he said, "Well, you can go up there and talk to the judge by yourself. You don't need me to do that." And I said, "Okay." So I went up there, talked to the judge about scheduling, came back, and then that same attorney embarrassed me once we went on the record. He said, "She had a conversation with you, Judge, that I wasn't a part of." And I thought, wait a minute, he just told me it was fine. And I got upset. And then I realized how how frustrated I looked. And one of the other male defense attorneys said to me later, "Dudley, you're going to have to learn how to take and give hits. You never played football. You weren't ready for any of this, but trust me, learn how to take and give hits." And then another lawyer, when I walked out into the hall, said, "Hey, Dudley, you want to stop being attacked? Stop bleeding." And I thought, okay, these were not the kind of ways I was raised as a girl in the 50s, you know. I had to learn how to take and give hits, and I had to learn how to stop bleeding. And those were good lessons for me, but certainly something that male lawyers didn't have to experience. And I remember once going to the police department on a case, and a sergeant behind the desk said, "Hey, honey, would you grab a cup of coffee for me?" I said, "Who do you think I am?" And he said, "I don't know." And I said, "Well, I'm a deputy district attorney." He goes, "Oh, I thought you were a secretary." And so some were very obvious how I was treated, some not so much. But fast forward to when I was retiring as an elected district attorney. When I started out, there were 58 counties in California. Only there were only 8 female district attorneys. Kamala Harris was one of them. I was one of them. And by the time I retired, more than half of the district attorneys in California were now women. So in my era, things changed radically.
That is incredible. And I hope that we continue to see that and encourage our girls to be strong and yeah.
We have to.
And so I think then that is something that I notice. And one of the reasons why I've really felt so strongly about supporting women in this phase and trying to figure out what can I do to help lift the voice of women and help share women's stories because I do think it's so important. Something that I've just noticed throughout my career is that and I hate to say this across the board because I know a lot of it is just personality and whatnot, but I think oftentimes when I run into other women that are colleagues or that I work with, we tend to question our abilities more often than our male counterparts. A woman may have 9 out of 10 of the qualifications for a job, let's say, and she will not apply because she doesn't possess that one quality. Whereas a man would have two
Right.
out of 10 and think he's fully
Hmm.
qualified for that
Hmm.
position and go right and have the confidence to walk into that room and apply. And I just I want to ask you as someone who has clearly been so successful in her career, what would you say to other women who may have that doubt in themselves? What is it that drives you?
Hmm. First of all, I would say go for it.
Mhm,
Just do it. If the job interests you and you can imagine yourself being good at that job, do it. I don't
mhm.
know if men are more insecure or if they don't talk about their insecurities as much as we as women do. But I grew up with an extraordinary home with a mother who absolutely, she was not concerned with me getting married. She was very concerned with me having a profession and being financially independent. And my grandfather was a person who was homeless. He was an immigrant from Poland. And so I grew up with a lot of poverty around me and not a lot of education. My mom was committed to education as being the difference. And so she went to college, one college class at a time for 17 years. And by the time I graduated with my second master's degree, she got her BA. And I asked UCSB if we could walk down the plank together, and we did.
That's
She
incredible.
felt so strong that I could accomplish anything that came my way. And in some ways, her love was conditional because she kept pushing me and pushing me. My father gave me unconditional love, and the combination made me feel lovable no matter what I achieved, but that I could achieve absolutely anything. So I encourage women who are at that age, who are questioning whether they can, you absolutely can. And I encourage fathers and mothers of girls to make sure they are constantly giving them a message that they are capable, intelligent, compassionate, and the world is theirs. All they have to do is work hard and go for it.
Yeah, I love that. And do you think because you went into law after sort of having your first career, do you think that that shaped um, your confidence and
Yes.
your leadership style?
Yeah, no, I think, let me give you an example. I was in a very tense case, extraordinarily tense case, and it involved, and I don't want to get into the names of all the different people, a police chief and a college president. And a crime had occurred and was related to a campus. And the campus president and athletic director didn't want the police on the campus interviewing people for a lot of good reasons. It upset the students, and law enforcement felt we have a murder here. We have to interview these people. And these two men were just fighting each other. So on one side was the president of the college and the athletic director. On the other side was the chief of police, and the investigation was stalled. It could not be stalled. This is a murder case. So I invited all of them into my office, and you could feel the tension in the room. When the police chief first arrived, he sat at the head of the table. I quietly went over to him. I said, "My office, my table, please sit anywhere else but the head." He looked shocked that a woman would say such a thing. And by the way, I was the only woman in the room. And then same thing happened when the police chief, when the president arrived of the college. He sat at the head of the table. So I quietly went over to him and I did the same thing. And again, he looked shocked because they're both men who were used to sitting at the head of the table. But I had 4 boys at home, so I knew how to deal with this. And then once they all sat down,
Right.
I said, "Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming. Here's the rules. Here's the rules of engagement." And I explained to them how we were going to do it, how people were going to listen, how people were going to talk. And at the end, if they felt they hadn't said everything they wanted to say, I was going to go through it again, but we were going to do it this way. And all of that
Mhm.
came from being a mother of 4 sons. And the meeting went super well. The investigation got done and justice was served.
That is great. And so, has your definition of success changed over the years? I mean, you have just reinvented yourself so many times, uh, which I just
Yeah.
love and admire so much. Um, tell me, sort of the evolution after retirement. You didn't stop. You haven't stopped.
No,
Still,
no.
you're still working and still moving into new roles.
In
Mm.
terms of how it has changed, for a while, we're all still coming off COVID, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. People kept saying, don't make any big decisions in your first year of retirement.
Mm.
But one day the light went on, just like the first time I saw an abused child, and that became my pilot light to proceed in my career. I realized I had been blessed with a tremendous education. I'd written these 2 crime novels. I'd been the district attorney. I'd done all this. For me to stop giving just because I'm not getting a paycheck and I'm retired would be such an insult to all of the generous people who educated me along the way. So I felt I wanted to continue to give back because of all the education and experience I had. It was time to now mentor and give back. I'd always had mentors young, but this was going to be different in terms of finding how I could best help. Luckily, I had been the chair of POST, Police Officer Standards and Training in Sacramento, since 2016. And then I retired and I gave up that post. But then I'd been offered another job, which was to be the head of law enforcement accountability for the state of California. So now there was a rule that when a law enforcement officer engaged in an act of misconduct, gross misconduct, that they could lose their ability to ever be a police officer again. And so the accountability board was formed. The governor put me as the chair of that, and I got to hear cases of where law enforcement officers had lost their license and then they wanted it back. And I heard, and I truly have always been a good listener, but you can't stop thinking about how important listening is. I didn't go into any of these cases believing the chief or the sheriff or the community member or the police officer was right or wrong. Because of all my years, 32 and a half in the DA's office, I knew there's 2 sides to every story. And I've been able to work on that as chair of that committee now for a couple of years. So I feel like all my life experience from being a deputy DA and being the district attorney and being a mother of 4 and writing the books put me in the best place to be openly listening, but listening for key factors to decide. So that's been great. And then since coming to Colorado, I am now chair of a board of where a shelter in town. I live in a mountain community up here, and there's domestic violence, animal abuse, and this shelter takes domestic violence victims, survivors, and their animals, and they're doing really important things. But this is a small town in Colorado. So, what I have learned from all my experience being in the incredibly enlightened community of Santa Barbara County, I can now help with this organization. So, I love helping them grow and getting the word out so domestic violence victims know there's a safe place to go. There are other exciting things happening in life that they can now do, and then maintaining my contact with California and trying to continue the reputation we had for a very long time of being the gold standard.
They're so lucky to have you. That is incredible. And I'd love to hear more about that work. But I did want to touch on something that you brought up. You wrote these 2 novels. Just writing novel on its own is a huge undertaking. Um,
Oh my
when
God.
did you find time to do this? What prompted it? And just kind of tell me about that.
Sure. Well, very briefly, what prompted it? You understand what it's like to write, and to write a book, and to make sure you've got the facts right and all that stuff. You're great at that. So what happened was I was doing a lot of teaching and lecturing around the state on various issues having to do with criminal justice. And I was being paid for some of them. And one person said, I could double your salary if you'd write a book, because published authors bring in more people, and you could sign your book. And none of this ever occurred to me before. So I was about to go for a hike with my husband, and I said, "Hey, they mentioned, and we needed the money. We had these four little boys, that if I write a book, I can make more money when I lecture." He said, "It seems to me you should only write a book if you have something to say." And I thought, "Do I have something to say?" And we then proceeded to go on the hike, and we ended up not talking on that hike, 'cause I told him I wanted to use the endorphins and the time to ask myself the question, do I have something to say? And at the end of the hike, I said, "I do." And he said, "Fantastic." That day I started writing. I hand wrote for 11 days in between being a mom, being a deputy district attorney. I was driven by these characters that I had created, and I filled up all these legal pads. And so at the end of the 11 days, it was done. Now, saying it was done, I was not a writer. It took me 5 years and rewrites to actually get it out there. And it was hard, and I was told things like, "You write like a lawyer, not a novelist." So I started taking took an adult ed class. They said, "Start reading great novelists." I started reading novelists. I started reading books on how to write a novel. But that took 5 years to change and to make that happen. And when I would write, this will make you laugh, Sarah, is I had to get my kids up, fed, and to school. The characters in my books would wake me up in my head around 3:30 in the morning, because they had something to say and they wanted their story told. So at 3:30 in the morning, I'd grab a cup of coffee, go down to my computer, and from 3:30 to 5:30, I wrote on weekdays. And then on weekends, I could write as much as I wanted to. So that's how it happened. It was incredibly cathartic.
I do feel that way. When you've got that in your mind, you have to get it down on paper in order to focus on anything else. Let's go back to women underestimating themselves, especially now that I'm entering into this new phase of life. You've spent the last several years, you know, really focused on making everyone else not only happy but just survival mode, really, with kids, raising kids and families. And then you get to this point, I think, where your kids are a little bit older and they don't necessarily need you in the same way anymore, and you have
Mhm.
time to stop and think about what it is that you want again for the first time in many years. And I think a lot of times women, we underestimate ourselves, or we think it's too late to start something new at this point. That's clearly not the case. What do you say to women at this particular crossroad?
I would ask them to spend some time, as I did, hiking up that hill. You need to really spend time by yourself. I find if I'm in nature
Mm,
and I'm moving, if I'm walking through nature,
mhm,
that I'm getting the endorphins, I'm getting the beauty, I'm breathing the air,
mhm,
and I ask myself the hard questions. What do I want to do now? What would be fulfilling with me? How do I want to
mhm,
contribute? How do I view my responsibility now? And take the time to find out what that calling is. It could be a career you had before. It could be a career that you've gotten interested in because of your engagement with your children and your family. It could be something that you just read about, heard about, thought about. And then once you start to feel maybe, maybe there is this pilot light that's being lit now, then follow through, because the last thing you want is regrets. You don't want to be, if you're thinking about this at 40 and you're thinking, oh, but I'm older on my kids, and you don't do it at 40, then it's going to be harder and harder and harder. Not impossible. God knows, not impossible. You could keep on going, but do it now. And talk to if you have a significant other, talk to them about this process that you're going through so you get them to be your best cheerleader and get that support. If you can't get it, so be it. Get it from your women friends, get it from yourself, but go for it because now is your time.
I love that. And then you brought up another good point. And let me ask you, do you have other women friends that have been your support throughout this? I know for myself, that's been crucial. Having great friends that I can really talk to and have real honest conversations with. Do you have that support system? And what would you say to women if they maybe haven't found that yet?
Yeah, I think it's really important to have women friends that you can be open and honest with.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you're going to start to feel isolated. You're going to think, for instance, when we started this conversation, you talked about the guilt you feel
Mhm.
when you're at work, you're not with your kids. When you're kids, you're not doing your work. I remember living that every single day. And I never talked to a friend about it. I never heard another woman say that out loud. And so the minute you said it now, it even felt like, huh, I never really heard someone say that, but I lived with it every day. So having a close woman friend who's going through things as you're going through things gives you gives you a buddy to run things through, someone who holds you accountable, all that's really important. So, women friends are critical. I think Jane Fonda talks about that being the most important relationship. And I can't disagree. I really can't. One of my best friends now is Jackie Lacey. She's the former district attorney of LA. We've been through everything together. And I can say things to her that other people can't because I can say, hey, as your best friend, I'm going to tell you what I'm hearing now and
Mhm.
she can do that with me and we both immediately respect each other and maybe even more importantly we know that person has our back and they would never say anything to hurt us but they would be brave enough and they respect us enough to say things that will give us clarity that we couldn't give ourselves.
That is so true. It's not just being able to be honest, but having that trust is so important.
Have to.
Yeah, women can I mean, I think we've all experienced that too, not only in the workplace, but just maybe in the at school drop-offs or whatnot.
Yes.
But not all women,
Yes.
um, are women's women.
Sure.
I don't know how else to put that. That's something that can be, a sad lesson to learn, and I would love to encourage more women to just really, support each other and rather than be
Hmm.
judgmental of each other's choices, we just be more
Hmm.
supportive of each
I think the women that aren't that way are insecure and unsure of their place. They and don't yet have the concept it's better to give than receive because they don't understand the joy of mentoring and being supportive, which, as you know and I know, is such a gift.
Is there any advice, for women stepping into a new season of life, not necessarily just midlife, any new season? Uh, you've now entered into retirement and clearly have continued to stay involved and continue to help and work in different capacities. Any advice?
Believe in yourself and keep challenging yourself, whatever
Mhm.
that is. I've always, and I want to talk about something
Mm.
physical for a minute. I've always been a little afraid of
Yeah.
heights. So one of the things I did when I moved to Colorado
Okay.
was I signed up for a climbing class, a wall climbing class, and with a big tower. And I
Wow.
thought I could do this.
Uh-huh.
And there's a nexus between physically
Mhm.
challenging yourself and believing in yourself in other capacities. I think exercise is so good, and I
Mhm.
think finding that. The other thing that quite surprised me is I was married to my husband John for 32 years. I adored him. It was a fabulous
Mm.
relationship. He died of pancreatic cancer in
Mhm.
2019, and pancreatic cancer is what my father died of
Mhm.
when he was only 55. So I knew
Yeah.
he was how this story was going to end. And it was so hard for me to think of
Mm.
life without him. And after he died,
Ah.
I spent 2 years in grief counseling, dealing with
Mhm.
everything. I was sort of in my own world because even though I knew he was going to die and he lived 32 months from diagnosis to death, when he died, I still
Uh-huh.
needed so much time alone to process that. I never imagined
Yeah.
I'd get involved with somebody else, not because I was closed off to it, because it didn't interest me. I had my kids, I had
Mhm.
my friends, I had a great marriage for many years. But then along the
Mm.
hiking trails of Crested Butte, I met Russ. And
Mhm.
Russ became such a great friend and person,
Mhm.
and we had so much fun together. My kids were grown, my grandkids,
Uh-huh.
and I started dating him, and then ultimately we got married. And I'm so glad I took that risk of getting
Yeah.
involved again. I was 68 at the time
Uh-huh.
that I met him. I'm 73 now. We are super
Mhm.
happy and having a blast.
Mm.
So whether you're taking risks in a
Oh.
relationship, whether you're taking risks
Mhm.
athletically, or whether you're taking risks in your career, go for it because you don't want to have regrets. You want to have a smile on your
Yeah.
face.
Oh, I'm so happy that you were able to find that. And because I know that that was a really difficult time for you and you deserve all that happiness. You've always been somebody who's been really active. You've been a runner, you work out clearly, the word perimenopause. So I'm curious to know if that's something that you can look back on. Did you have symptoms?
I remember, and the timing couldn't have been worse because I felt it coming
Uh-huh.
on. I would hear myself speak. I didn't sound like
Mhm.
me. I would get into this dark place. I had short patience, so I'd gotten on some kind of pills, which helped. Then the diet, which helped. But being a victim to your body was something I had never experienced until perimenopause. And I'm much more compassionate. Being in that dark place during
Mhm.
perimenopause, I was able to understand depression more. Which was so important to me because I thought depression was, gee, why can't they just get
Yeah.
happy? I didn't understand that you're a victim to your body and your hormones and your symptoms.
Mhm. I am so grateful for you for taking the time to talk with me today.
If I can just say one more time,
Mhm.
find your passion, find your pilot light, and go
Mhm.
for it.
Thank you so much. So great to talk with you.
Anytime. Thank you, my friend. Bye bye.
That was my conversation with Joyce Dudley, and just found it so incredibly inspiring. There was something so powerful about hearing from a woman who has continued to evolve, grow, take risks, and step into new versions of herself throughout different seasons of life. I hope this conversation inspires you too, especially if there's something in your life you've been wanting to try, a leap you've been afraid to take, or a voice inside you that's been quietly saying, maybe there is more for me. I think so many women spend years doubting themselves, playing small, or waiting until they feel fully ready before going after what they really want. But conversations like this remind me how important it is to believe in ourselves, take chances, and surround ourselves with people who encourage us to grow into the fullest version of who we're meant to be. And honestly, I think we owe that not only to ourselves, but to our daughters and the next generation watching us. They deserve to see women who go after their dreams, who trust themselves, and believe they are capable of more. If this episode resonated with you, make sure you're following Nowhere Near Done so you don't miss future conversations like this one. And if you know someone who might need a little encouragement or inspiration right now, send this episode to them too, because it's never too late to become the person you are meant to be, and you are nowhere near done. We'll see you next time.